Hello, my name's Joseph, and today I will be taking you through a quick whistle-stop tour of the nervous system. In this talk, I'll be explaining why the nervous system is important, and also what it involves and how it works. So to start off with, the nervous system is a complex network of neurons and cells that carry messages and electrical signals to and from the brain and spinal cord. I like to see the nervous system as kind of like a call center or a satellite which connects callers from different parts of the world with each other. So, for example, signals will get sent from somewhere in the world when you call someone to the call center or the satellite where it's like processed, and then that signal will then get relayed to wherever it needs to go. So the nervous system works in a similar fashion, allowing signals from different parts of the body to be sent to the brain, where it's processed and then relayed to another part of the body, which will bring about a response. So the nervous system consists of primarily two main areas. So we have the central nervous system, which is basically just the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, and we will abbreviate that to CNS. And we also have the peripheral nervous system. So that's basically the rest of the body, which doesn't include the brain and the spinal cord. So you can have nerves in your hands or your feet. Okay, periphery just means edge. So basically, they're nerve cells that will carry information from the edges of your body to the central nervous system. Okay. So to go into a bit more, and we'll quickly abbreviate that to PNS. So that's peripheral nervous system. So to go into a bit more detail about what these nerves actually contain. So these nerves, so this is a nerve cell, or we call it a neuron, and basically it's a cell that's highly specialized and adaptive to its function. So going through each, some of the main important structures and features of this neuron, we'll start off with the axon, which is basically this long fiber here. Okay. Now the axon is basically like a long tail structure which joins the cell body at a specialized junction, and it allows signals to run down one nerve cell into another. And as you can see, this axon is surrounded by this orange kind of fatty substance, which is called myelin. And basically this is very important because it allows signals to be transmitted very, very quickly across the nerve cells. And this is particularly important, especially when it comes to making reflex actions and responding to danger. We're going to go into a bit more detail about that later, but in order to minimize the amount of damage done to the body, you need to be able to react quickly and send impulses very quickly along these nerve cells to be able to elicit a very quick response to remove yourself from that danger. So this, we call it a myelin sheath, but and that allows you to transmit the signal a lot more quicker than if you didn't have one of these sheaths. So yeah. And then here we have the cell body. So you've got the nucleus, which basically controls the cell. You've got your cytoplasm and your cell membrane, and then you've got these and so the nucleus will carry your genetic information, but it also it's like the command center. It gives instructions on how to maintain the neuron structure, but also provides energy to drive activities of the neuron. So, and the cell membrane basically encloses the whole structure and protects it, and allows it to interact with its immediate surroundings. And the dendrites here are they're kind of like tree branches. So they are very, they're kind of like antennae. They receive information and process signals from the axons of other neurons. So basically they're kind of like the receivers or the antennae, like on your TV. They receive the signal and then process that signal, and then that signal gets sent down all the way through the neuron, through the axon body, all the way to the nerve ending, and then that will pass on to the next cell, and so on. So moving on, I'm going to talk now a bit more in detail about reflex arcs. So reflex arcs are basically a way of responding to stimuli which may be dangerous. For example, in this case, a hot flame, a burning candle, and basically this is because the way it's different from a normal response is that it bypasses the central nervous system. So usually what happens is you will feel the stimulus, which in this case is the flame. Your receptors in your hand will detect this. They will send impulses down this neuron which is called your sensory neuron. And usually what happens is that information will go to your brain. Your brain will process it and then send signals back down your relay neuron, which will then go to your motor neuron, which is the blue one, and that will go to a muscle, which will basically contract, and then that will pull your hand away from the flame. But when you're faced with a reflex arc, that usually doesn't get involved. The brain isn't involved in that. So instead of the signal going to the brain, it goes to this relay neuron, which is kind of like the interconnection between the sensory neuron, which is in purple, and the motor neuron, which is in blue. And it bypasses that, so we get a lot of a faster response. Okay, and that basically minimizes the amount of time your hand is on the flame, which will consequently minimize the amount of damage your hand will be subjected to. So this is a more detailed diagram of what's happening. So as you can see, you've got your flame. That we call that the stimulus. Okay. So a stimulus is just an external change in the environment. It can be harmful or not. Other stimuli can involve maybe light, and then your eye might respond to that, but in this case it's a flame. So we'll call that the stimulus. And basically receptors in your hand will detect this stimulus, and then they will generate an electrical impulse which travels down your sensory neuron all the way to your relay neuron. Okay. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail about this thing called a synapse. That's basically a junction which connects two neurons together. So what happens is the impulse will travel down your sensory neuron, which synapses with your relay neuron. The impulse will continue down the relay neuron to your motor neuron, and that will travel down all the way to what we call an effector, which basically just brings about an effect. In this case, it's a muscle, and the impulse will cause that muscle to contract, which will pull your hand away from the flame. So just to finally go into a bit more detail about these things called synapses. So what are they? So they're basically junctions between two neurons, and they allow the signal to pass from one neuron to another. So here, for example, I will put a sensory neuron, and on this side I will put a relay neuron. Okay. And the relay neuron is located in the spinal cord, okay, in the central nervous system. So what happens is at this junction, so this junction here, we call that a synapse. Okay. And what happens here is that your impulse will travel down, and once it reaches the end, we call that the axon terminal, so the end of the nerve cell. These chemicals, small chemicals called neurotransmitters, will basically be released, and they will diffuse across the gap. Okay, and they will eventually reach receptors on your relay neuron, and when they reach those receptors and bind to them, that will stimulate another impulse which will be able to travel down the relay neuron. The same thing will happen between the junction between the relay neuron and the motor neuron, and then the process will continue. So yeah, that was a very quick a quick tour of the nervous system. I hope it all made sense, and I'll see you soon. Bye.